It was one of those quiet afternoons when the sky looked soft and a little tired, the kind of day that made everything feel slower than usual. The school day had ended and the air still carried the faint sound of laughter from kids walking home. Among them was a tall teenage boy with his backpack hanging loosely off one shoulder. He wasn't in a hurry. His earphones were in, the music low, his head nodding slightly to the rhythm. He had just finished a math test that had taken up most of his energy, and now all he wanted was a snack and a break before heading home. He stopped at a small corner store that everyone in the neighborhood knew. The man behind the counter recognized him immediately, greeting him with a friendly nod. The teen smiled back, grabbed a bottle of juice and a small pack of chips. He paid, said thank you, and stepped outside. It was an ordinary moment, something he had done hundreds of times before. As he walked down the sidewalk, cars rolled by, people passed, and the hum of normal life filled the background. He wasn't thinking about anything serious, just about homework, a funny video his friend had sent, and whether his mom would be home early or not. But a few blocks away, 2 police officers were sitting in their patrol car. They had just received a call about a suspicious person seen near a row of parked cars. The description was vague: young black male, dark hoodie, backpack. It could have been anyone, but in their minds it was already someone who might cause trouble. They drove slowly down the street, scanning both sides. When they saw the teen walking alone, head down, hands in his pockets, they exchanged looks. To them, he fit the description perfectly. Without saying much, one of them flipped on the lights. The quiet street filled with the flash of red and blue. The teen turned around, startled by the sudden noise. He pulled out his earphones and blinked in confusion as the police car stopped right beside him. He hadn't done anything wrong, and for a second, he thought maybe they were stopping for someone else. But then one officer stepped out, his voice firm. "Hey, you there. Hands where I can see them." The boy hesitated, unsure of what was happening. "Me?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "Yeah, you. Take your hands out of your pockets." He did as told, holding his hands slightly away from his body, just like he'd seen people do in movies. His heart started to race. He could feel people looking from across the street. "What's going on?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "You match the description of someone we're looking for," one officer said, walking closer. "Where are you coming from?" "I was just at the store," he replied quickly. "I bought some chips and juice. I'm just going home." The other officer stepped around him, looking at his backpack. "We'll need to check your bag." The boy froze. "Check my bag? Why?" "Don't question me," the first officer snapped. "We're doing our job." He could feel his throat tighten. He didn't want trouble, but something about this felt unfair. He hadn't done anything, and still here he was, standing on the sidewalk while 2 officers eyed him like he'd just robbed someone. "Sir," he said quietly, "I didn't do anything. You can see my receipt." He pulled it slightly out of his pocket to show proof from the store. The officer didn't even glance at it. I said, "Let me see the bag." The boy's hands trembled as he slowly unzipped it, showing nothing but his notebooks and his phone charger. But the officers didn't back down. One of them reached out to take it from him. The boy stepped back just a little, enough to make the officer raise his voice. "Don't move. Do you want to make this worse for yourself?" The sound made him flinch. His eyes darted around. There were now a few people standing nearby, watching. Some held their phones up, recording. The boy felt his stomach twist. He wanted to disappear, but there was nowhere to go. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he said again, his voice cracking slightly. "Can you please call my mom?" The officer shook his head. "We'll talk to your mom later. For now, you need to cooperate." His hands were shaking. He felt small and helpless. Everything he had learned about staying calm around authority replayed in his mind, but his fear kept pushing through. His voice came out in a whisper, "Please, I didn't do anything." One of the officers reached for his arm, turning him around toward the patrol car. The boy stumbled forward, his breath coming faster now. "Stop resisting," the officer said sharply, even though he wasn't resisting at all. "I'm not," he said, panicked. His eyes started to sting. "Please, I just want to call my mom." Someone in the crowd shouted, "He's just a kid." Another person yelled, "He didn't do anything." The boy could hear the voices, but everything felt distant, like a fog had dropped over the world. The flashing lights blurred in his vision. The officer's grip was tight around his wrist, cold metal handcuffs ready in his other hand. And then, in the middle of the chaos, his phone slipped from his pocket and hit the ground. The screen lit up, an incoming call. His mother's name flashed across the screen. One of the officers glanced down, annoyed. The boy saw it and blurted, "That's my mom! Please, just let me answer it." The officer hesitated, then sighed and picked up the phone. He pressed the speaker button without saying anything. A calm but firm woman's voice came through. "Jordan, what's going on? Why aren't you home yet?" The boy tried to speak, but his throat was tight. "Mom, they stopped me. They think I did something." The other officer frowned, suddenly unsure. The woman's tone changed instantly, no longer calm but controlled and sharp. "Who am I speaking to?" The officer stiffened but didn't answer. The woman continued. "This is Special Agent Denise Carter with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I want to know why my son is being detained." Both officers froze. The air seemed to shift around them. The one holding the handcuffs slowly lowered his arm. The other stepped back, eyes wide, realizing the weight of what he had just heard. The boy looked at them, still breathing fast, confused by their sudden change in attitude. The officer holding the phone swallowed hard. Ma'am, there seems to be a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Her voice echoed through the speaker. "You have my son standing on the street surrounded by flashing lights because he matches a vague description?" "I'll be there in 5 minutes. Do not move him." The line went dead. The officers didn't say a word. They stood still, trying to figure out what to do next. One of them finally muttered, "Let's just make sure everything's fine." The boy didn't know whether to feel relieved or scared. His hands were still shaking and people were still watching. One woman from across the street called out, "You all right, honey?" He nodded, barely able to speak. The flashing lights suddenly felt too bright. The sound of his heartbeat filled his ears. Every second dragged heavy and cold. 5 minutes had never felt so long. He could hear one of the officers whisper, "FBI? You've got to be kidding me." The other just kept glancing down the street, waiting, uneasy. The boy wanted to run, but he stayed still, afraid to make a wrong move. He kept thinking about his mom, how she was probably driving fast, her heart pounding. She had always told him what to do if something like this ever happened. Stay calm, be respectful, don't argue. But she had never told him how to handle the fear that crawled under your skin when you realized that even doing everything right might not be enough. As the minutes passed, he kept replaying her voice in his head. The strength in it, the authority. The same voice that had comforted him when he was scared of the dark as a little kid. The same voice that told him to never let anyone make him feel small. When the sound of a car engine approached fast and stopped nearby, everyone turned their heads. The officers straightened up. The boy didn't need to look. He already knew it was her. The car door opened with a sharp click that cut through the quiet street. Everyone turned to look. Out stepped a woman in a dark jacket, her step steady and confident, her face calm but firm. The badge clipped to her belt caught the afternoon light as she walked toward the 2 officers standing frozen beside her son. The boy's heart pounded. Relief washed over him the moment he saw her, but fear still sat heavy in his chest. She didn't rush, didn't raise her voice. Her presence alone was enough to make both officers straighten up as if they were suddenly aware of how badly things had gone. "Which one of you decided to stop my son?" she asked, her voice low but powerful. The older officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we received a call about a possible suspect in the area." "He matched the description." "Matched the description?" she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "A teenager walking home with a backpack? That's your description?" The officer hesitated, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find the right words. The younger one spoke up quickly, trying to fix it. "We were just following up on a call, ma'am. Nothing personal." The woman took a slow breath. "You detained a minor on the street without probable cause. You shouted at him, grabbed him, and nearly cuffed him. And you're telling me it's nothing personal?" She stepped closer, her eyes sharp. "Do you know who I am?" The older officer shifted his weight, unsure. "You said on the phone you were—" "I'm a federal agent," she said firmly. "And that boy is my son." The words hit the air like a sudden drop of thunder. The bystanders murmured softly, phone still recording. The officers looked at each other, pale and uncomfortable. The younger one stammered, "We didn't know." "That's the problem," she interrupted. "You shouldn't need to know who someone's mother is to treat them with basic respect." The silence that followed was thick. She turned to her son. His hands were trembling slightly and his eyes were still wide. She softened instantly, her voice dropping to a gentle tone. "Are you okay?" He nodded slowly. "I'm fine, Mom, just scared." She reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. It's okay. You're safe now. Then she turned back to the officers. I want your names and badge numbers. They both hesitated. The older one finally said, Ma'am, we can explain everything back at the station. No, she said flatly. You'll explain right here. The younger officer fumbled with a small notepad, scribbling quickly before tearing out the page and handing it to her. She took it, glanced at it, and slid it into her jacket pocket. One of the onlookers spoke up. Good for you, ma'am. They had no right. She didn't respond, just gave a brief nod before guiding her son away from the car. Let's go home, she said softly. They walked toward her vehicle, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the quiet street. Behind them, the officers stood still, unsure whether to feel angry or embarrassed. The crowd began to disperse, though a few people lingered, still recording, still whispering. When they got into the car, the boy finally let out a shaky breath he'd been holding. Mom, he said quietly, I really thought they were going to... He stopped, unable to finish. She looked over at him. I know, she said softly. You handled it the best you could. You stayed calm. I'm proud of you. He turned his head toward the window, blinking back the sting in his eyes. But I didn't even do anything. Her grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. You didn't have to. Sometimes that's the hardest part. The drive home was quiet. The city rolled by. Streetlights, parked cars, people walking dogs. All the small ordinary things that suddenly felt different after what had happened. The boy leaned back in his seat, trying to make sense of it. He wasn't angry yet, just confused and tired. At a red light, his mother reached over and gently squeezed his hand. Listen, she said. What happened today was wrong. But you need to remember it's not your fault. You didn't provoke them. You didn't do anything to deserve it, he nodded slowly. I know, but they looked at me like I was dangerous, she sighed. That's the hardest part to teach the world. To see you as who you are, not who they assume you are. He looked at her, realizing how steady she was, keeping her voice, even though he could see the tension in her jaw. Were you scared? He asked. She thought for a moment. Yes, she admitted. Not for me. For you. The light turned green and the car moved forward. Neither spoke for a while. The air felt heavy, filled with all the words they didn't know how to say yet. When they reached home, she parked and turned off the engine. For a moment, they just sat there. The boy stared at the dashboard while she sat quietly beside him. Finally, she said, I'll file a report tonight, and I'll make sure this doesn't just disappear. He turned to her, surprised. You can do that? She smiled faintly. I know people, and I know how the system works. I've spent years inside it. I also know it only changes when people speak up. He looked down at his hands, still remembering the feeling of being grabbed, the shouting, the flashing lights. What if it doesn't change? He asked softly. She turned toward him fully. Then we keep trying, she said simply. Because if we don't, nothing ever will. Later that evening, she sat in her home office typing a detailed report. Her fingers moved quickly, every sentence calm and factual, every detail recorded. Time, location, behavior, witnesses, everything. Her badge lay on the desk beside her laptop, a silent reminder of the power she carried and the responsibility that came with it. Her son sat on the couch nearby, scrolling through his phone. Videos of the incident were already spreading online. The footage showed the flashing lights, the shouting, and then her arrival. The comments section was filling fast, some angry, some supportive, some just shocked. Mom, he said quietly. People are already talking about it. She looked up from her screen. Let them, she said. Maybe it'll make others think twice before acting the same way. He hesitated. Do you think those officers are in trouble? They will be, she said calmly. There's a process, but what matters more is making sure this doesn't happen to someone else's kid. He nodded, his voice small. I just don't get why they thought I did something. She leaned back, looking tired for the first time that night. Because sometimes people see what they expect to see, she said quietly. Not what's really there. He didn't say anything after that. The house felt too quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the trees and distant traffic hummed softly. He wanted to forget the whole thing, but the memory clung to him. The flashing lights, the sound of orders shouted at him, the eyes of strangers watching. Hours later, he went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. He replayed every second in his mind, wondering if he could have done something different, said something else. But no matter how he looked at it, he kept coming back to the same truth. He hadn't done anything wrong. In her room, his mother sat by the window, the glow from her phone lighting her face. She had just sent her report to the department's Internal Affairs division. She knew tomorrow would bring calls, meetings, maybe even headlines. But for now, she just wanted her son to feel safe again. She looked out at the quiet street below, thinking of all the times she had seen similar cases on her desk at work, complaints, reports, stories that sounded almost the same. And now it had happened to her own child. That realization cut deeper than anything else. She whispered softly to herself, "Not this time. They won't brush this off." Down the hall, her son turned over in bed, clutching his blanket tighter. Somewhere deep inside, a new awareness had settled, a kind of understanding that things weren't as simple as he used to think. But mixed with the fear was something else too. Pride. Pride in the way his mother had stood up for him, in the way she carried strength without anger, control without cruelty. He closed his eyes, hearing her voice again in his head, steady, unshaken. "You didn't have to do anything wrong." He breathed slowly, the image of her standing tall in front of those officers replaying like a scene he'd never forget. For the first time since that moment, he felt a bit of calm. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. His mother would fight this until the end. And that gave him more peace than any apology ever could. The next morning, the sun rose quietly over the neighborhood, painting the streets gold and soft. But inside the house, it didn't feel like an ordinary morning. The air carried something heavy and silent. The boy sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cereal in front of him, though he hadn't touched it. His mother stood by the counter, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Neither of them had said much since waking up. Finally, she broke the silence. "How did you sleep?" He shrugged, still staring down. "Not great, I figured," she said gently. "I didn't either." He looked up at her. "Do you think they're going to get in trouble?" She set her mug down and met his eyes. "I think there will be consequences," she said carefully. "But real change takes more than one complaint. It takes persistence." He nodded slowly, though he didn't really understand what that meant yet. "So what happens now?" "I have a meeting this afternoon," she said. "Internal Affairs wants to review what happened. And the department's chief has already called me." He raised his eyebrows. "They called you?" She gave a small smile. "Let's just say they realized who they were dealing with." He couldn't help but smile back, though it faded quickly. "Mom," he said quietly, "what if I wasn't your son? What if they didn't stop because you worked for the FBI?" Her smile disappeared. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes soft but sad. "Then I don't know if we'd be having this conversation right now," she said honestly. The words landed hard, heavier than anything else she'd said. The boy looked down again, his chest tight. She reached out and touched his hand gently. "But that's exactly why I have to do something," she added. "For you, and for every kid who doesn't have someone to walk in for them." That afternoon, she dressed in her professional suit, the one she wore for serious meetings. Her badge hung from her belt, her folder tucked under her arm. Before leaving, she came to the living room where her son was sitting quietly watching TV. "I'll be back soon," she said. "You okay staying here for a bit?" He nodded. "Yeah, I'll be fine." "Good," she said, smiling softly. "And hey, don't let this make you scared of the world, okay? We'll make sure something good comes out of it." He wanted to believe her. "I'll try," he said. When she left, the house felt empty again. He turned off the TV and stared out the window. Across the street, 2 kids were riding bikes, laughing like nothing bad could ever happen. For a moment, he wished he could go back to feeling that way too. Untouched, unbothered, unaware. Meanwhile, his mother arrived at the downtown building where the meeting was scheduled. Inside, a group of officials sat around a long table, representatives from the police department, internal affairs, and a few legal advisors. They stood as she entered, greeting her with polite nods, though some looked uneasy. "Agent Carter, thank you for coming," said one of the senior officers. She placed her folder on the table and sat down calmly. "I'm here because this isn't just about my son," she began. "It's about a pattern. What happened to him could have happened to any black teenager walking home that day. The only difference is, he had a parent who wears a badge." No one spoke for a moment. The chief of police cleared his throat. "We're deeply sorry for what happened," he said carefully. "Our department takes this very seriously." "Sorry isn't enough," she replied evenly. "Your officers profiled a child. They drew attention to him. humiliated him and made him fear for his safety, all based on a vague description and bias. That can't just end with an apology. An investigator from Internal Affairs leaned forward. We're conducting a full review. The officers involved have been placed on leave pending investigation. That's a start, she said. But I want more than suspension. I want training. I want accountability. And I want to make sure the next kid walking home in this city doesn't have to go through what my son did. The room stayed quiet again. A few people took notes. One officer tried to explain that the situation had escalated because of miscommunication. She looked him straight in the eyes. Miscommunication is when you say the wrong name or take a wrong turn, she said. This was judgment. And that's a problem you need to fix, not excuse. Her tone stayed calm, but every word carried weight. The people in the room could feel it. The meeting lasted an hour, filled with questions, promises, and paperwork. When it finally ended, she stood, shook hands politely, and walked out. Outside, she stopped for a moment in the parking lot and took a deep breath. For the first time that day, her shoulders relaxed a little, but she knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Back at home, her son sat scrolling through his phone when the door opened. "You're back early," he said. She smiled slightly. The meeting was long enough. He watched her take off her jacket, noticing how tired she looked. "Did they listen to you?" "They did," she said, sitting beside him. "Now we'll see if they actually do something." He nodded quietly. "I hope they do." She glanced at his phone. "What are you watching?" He turned the screen toward her. It was a news clip. The video from that day had already made it onto local TV. The caption read, "Teen wrongly targeted by police. Mother revealed as FBI agent." She sighed softly. "Well, I guess it's out there now." He looked at her nervously. "Are you mad?" "No," she said after a pause. "Maybe people need to see it. Sometimes a story has to be told for others to learn." Over the next few days, things changed quickly. Reporters called for interviews. Messages poured in, some offering support, others full of judgment. People in the neighborhood stopped by to check on them. Some shared stories of their own, small moments of fear, unfair stops, quiet humiliation that no one had ever reported. The boy listened to them, realizing how common it all was. He had never thought much about it before, but now it was impossible to ignore. One evening, his mother was invited to speak at a community meeting. She didn't plan to go at first. She didn't like attention, and she didn't want to turn her son's pain into a headline. But he convinced her. "Maybe if people hear you," he said, "they'll finally get it." So she went. The community center was packed, parents, students, officers, and reporters. When she stepped up to the microphone, the room went still. "I'm not here tonight as an agent," she began. "I'm here as a mother. My son was stopped by police who assumed he was a threat because of how he looked. I've spent my career working alongside law enforcement. I respect the badge. But respect has to go both ways." Her voice was steady, but every word came from deep inside. She spoke about fear, fairness, and the weight of assumptions. She told them how easily things could have gone wrong that day, and how a few seconds of bias could destroy a life. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then a man in uniform stood and began to clap. Others followed until the room filled with applause, not out of celebration but recognition. Her son sat in the front row, his chest full. Watching her speak that night changed something in him. He realized his mother wasn't just defending him. She was standing up for everyone who had ever been seen the wrong way. Afterward, people came up to thank her. Some asked for advice, others just wanted to shake her hand. She stayed for a while, speaking softly to parents who were scared for their own kids. When they finally got home, the night air was cool and quiet. The boy turned to her as they walked up the steps. "You were amazing," he said. She smiled, her eyes tired but warm. "I just told the truth. Still," he said, "you made people listen." She unlocked the door and looked back at him. That's how change starts. Someone listens, then someone acts. Inside, the house felt peaceful for the first time in days. The tension that had followed them since that afternoon seemed to lift a little. She hung up her jacket and sat down on the couch, letting out a long breath. Her son sat beside her, leaning his head on her shoulder. "Do you think it'll really change anything?" he asked softly. She thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe not everything, but maybe enough." Enough for someone else to walk home without being afraid? He nodded, the corners of his mouth turning up slightly. I hope so. They sat together quietly, the sound of crickets faint outside the window. For now there was calm. Tomorrow might bring headlines, meetings, maybe even more noise. But for that night, it was just a mother and her son, safe, together, and finally breathing a little easier. A few days passed since the community meeting, but the story hadn't slowed down. It was on the news, in newspapers, and all over social media. Everywhere the boy looked, there was someone talking about what had happened to him. Some people called it injustice, some called it a wake-up call, and others said things that made him want to stay offline completely. At first, it felt strange to see his face and name mentioned by strangers. Reporters stood outside their neighborhood more than once, trying to get a comment. The boy's mother always told them the same thing. No comments, please. And then she would close the door. One morning, she sat at the kitchen table reading an email from her office. Her face was calm, but her son could tell she was thinking deeply. What's wrong? He asked. Nothing's wrong, she said softly. But this is bigger than I expected. The Bureau wants to review how local law enforcement handles racial bias training. They've asked me to consult. He blinked in surprise. You mean you're going to help them change things? That's the goal, she said. But change doesn't come easy. Some people are already pushing back. He frowned. Why, don't they see what happened? They see, she said, folding her hands together. They just don't want to believe it could happen in their department. Admitting it means accepting that something's broken, and not everyone's ready for that. She gave him a small smile. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. He nodded quietly, though deep down he was tired of the attention. He missed the days when he could just walk outside without anyone whispering or looking twice. Some kids at school had started treating him differently. Some called him brave, others avoided him, unsure what to say. That afternoon, he was sitting alone at lunch when one of his teachers walked up. Mind if I sit? She asked. He shrugged. Sure, she smiled kindly. I just wanted to tell you something. I watched your mom's speech the other night. She handled herself with such grace. You must be proud. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I am. She hesitated for a moment, then added, What happened to you was wrong, but you being here, still showing up, still trying, that matters too. He didn't know how to respond. He gave a small smile, thankful but still uneasy. Thanks, he said quietly. Later, as he walked home, he noticed people waving at him, neighbors who had lived there for years but had never really spoken before. They smiled. Some even said, We're proud of you, or Your mom did the right thing. It felt strange to be noticed for something he never wanted to happen. When he got home, his mom was sitting at her desk again, her laptop open, papers spread around. Long day? She asked, looking up. He shrugged. Just weird. Everyone keeps talking about it. Feels like I'm part of some big story, but I didn't ask for it. She closed her laptop gently. I know, and I'm sorry it's been like this. But sometimes stories choose us. What we do with them, that's what defines us. He sat across from her. I just want to go back to normal. Her eyes softened. I know you do. And I want that for you too. But sometimes normal has to change, especially when it opens the door for something better. That night, as she was cleaning up the kitchen, her phone rang. It was the police chief. She listened quietly for a long time, then said, Thank you for letting me know, and hung up. Her son looked up from the couch. Was that about the officers? She nodded. They're both officially under review. The department found that they acted without sufficient cause. So, they're fired? He asked. Not yet, she said. They'll go through hearings. But it's a step. He leaned back, unsure how to feel. It doesn't really make me happy, he said after a while. She nodded slowly. It's not supposed to. Justice doesn't always feel like joy. Sometimes it just feels like balance. The following week, she attended another meeting, this time with both the local police and community representatives. The room was tense when she arrived. Several officers looked uncomfortable, while a few residents stared at them with anger. She stood at the front and began, her tone steady and calm. We can't fix the past, she said, but we can stop repeating it. It starts with awareness, with honesty, and with understanding the power of perception. A younger officer raised his hand. Ma'am, I understand what you're saying, but most of us are just doing our jobs. We don't mean to offend anyone, she nodded. I know most of you mean well. But intent doesn't erase impact. My son was just walking home. He was respectful, calm, and cooperative, and still he was treated like a suspect. That's not doing your job. That's reacting to a bias you might not even know you have. The officer looked down, unsure of what to say. She continued, You wear the uniform to protect, not to intimidate, and protection should look the same no matter who's standing in front of you. The room went silent. Even the skeptical faces seemed to soften. After the meeting, a few officers approached her privately. One said quietly, I have a teenage son, too. What you said? It made me think, she smiled faintly. That's where it starts. Back home, her son listened as she told him about the meeting. Sounds like you're changing minds, he said. Maybe a few, she said. But that's enough for now. The days passed slowly, filled with more talks, calls, and interviews. She was patient through all of it, but her son could see how tired she was becoming. Late at night, she would sit on the couch with her coffee, staring at the television without really watching it. One evening, he came over and sat beside her. Mom, he said softly, you've been working nonstop. You should rest. She looked at him and smiled. I'll rest when I know you can walk down the street without looking over your shoulder. He didn't argue. He just sat quietly beside her. The following weekend, something unexpected happened. The local police department invited both of them to an event, a public forum about community safety. At first, he didn't want to go. I don't want to stand in front of all those people again, he said. She placed a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to say anything. Just be there. Sometimes your presence says enough. So they went. The community center was filled with people. Families, officers, reporters, and local leaders. The air buzzed with quiet conversation until the chief took the stage. He spoke about rebuilding trust, about lessons learned, and about the importance of respect. Then, to everyone's surprise, he invited the boy and his mother to stand beside him. The crowd turned to look. The boy felt his chest tighten, but his mother gave him a reassuring nod. They walked up together. The chief spoke into the microphone. This young man went through something no one should ever experience. But instead of staying silent, he and his mother have inspired change in our department. From this month forward, we are implementing new training to address bias and build understanding. Applause filled the room. The boy looked out at the faces, some smiling, some teary, all paying attention. When the chief stepped back, his mother spoke briefly. This isn't about punishment, she said. It's about progress. It's about making sure that next time the outcome is different. Better. Her voice carried steady and true. The crowd applauded again. After the event, several people approached them, parents, teachers, even a few officers. One woman hugged her and said, You made us all proud today. That night, as they drove home, the boy stared out the window. The city lights blurred into long streaks of gold. I think people really listened this time, he said softly. His mother nodded. They did, and maybe now some of them will start to see. When they got home, they both felt lighter. She kicked off her shoes and laughed softly for the first time in a while. You know, she said, I think we're finally turning a corner. He smiled. Does that mean things can go back to normal now? She thought for a moment, then smiled back. Maybe not the old normal, but maybe a better one. They sat together in the living room, the quiet finally feeling peaceful again. The boy leaned his head back, feeling safe. For the first time since that day, he didn't feel like just a story on a screen.
He felt like himself again, a kid with a future, a mother who would always fight for him.
And a world that might finally be ready to change, one small step at a time. Weeks passed, and life slowly began to settle again, though nothing was quite the same. The boy was back to his regular school routine, but people still recognized him wherever he went. Sometimes he heard whispers in the hallway, not cruel ones, but curious, cautious ones. Everyone knew what had happened, and though most treated him kindly, he could still feel that invisible space people kept around him, as if they were careful not to say the wrong thing. He didn't blame them. He just wanted to live quietly again. Go to class, hang out with friends, listen to music, walk home without anyone watching him too closely. But deep down, he also understood that something had changed in him. He wasn't the same boy who had left home that day with earphones in and snacks in his backpack. He had seen something about the world that he couldn't unsee. One evening, his mother came home late from work. She looked tired but calm, holding a folder under her arm. He was sitting on the couch doing homework when she walked in. "How was your day?" she asked gently. "Fine," he said. "Just school stuff." She smiled faintly. "That's good. Normal is good." She sat down beside him, and for a moment they both stayed quiet. Then she said, "The review is over." He looked up. "The one about the officers?" She nodded. "The department finished their investigation. The results are public now." He waited, his heart beating faster. "What did they say?" "They found that the officers acted on bias, not reasonable suspicion. They're being reassigned and required to go through retraining," she said calmly. "They won't be on the streets for a while." He nodded slowly, not sure how to feel. Part of him felt relief, but another part felt sad. Not for them exactly, but for the whole situation. "So it's over?" he asked. His mother took a deep breath. "Not really. It's never completely over. But it's progress." The next morning, as he scrolled through his phone, he saw news headlines about it. Short videos, articles, even opinion pieces. Most people online were praising the decision, saying it showed accountability. Others debated what bias really meant. But the one thing everyone agreed on was that his mother's actions had started a conversation that mattered. Later that week, they were invited to speak at a local high school event about justice and community trust. His mother was supposed to give a talk, but this time, she asked if he would say a few words too. He froze when she said it. "Me, I don't know what to say." "Say what you feel," she told him. That's enough. He thought about it all night. He wasn't a public speaker. He didn't like attention. But when the day came, he walked on stage beside his mother, his heart pounding. The gym was full of students, teachers, and parents. Cameras pointed toward them. His mother spoke first, her voice strong and steady. "We can't undo what happened," she said, "but we can learn from it. We can teach our children and ourselves to look beyond fear and see humanity." Then she turned to him and nodded. "Would you like to say something?" He stepped up to the microphone. The room was silent. He looked out at the crowd, faces young and old, all watching him. His palms were sweaty, but he took a deep breath. "I used to think that being careful was enough," he began. "That if I was polite, if I followed the rules, nothing bad would happen. But sometimes, people see what they want to see. And when that happens, you don't get a chance to explain." A few heads nodded in the crowd. "I was scared that day," he continued. "But what scared me more was realizing that it could have ended differently if my mom hadn't shown up. That thought still keeps me awake some nights. But I'm here, and I'm thankful. Not just because I was saved, but because maybe what happened will help someone else." He looked at his mother, who gave him a proud smile. "I don't want anyone to be afraid of the people who are supposed to protect them," he said softly. "I just want everyone to be treated the same, and no matter what they look like." "That's it." The room erupted into applause. His mother put her arm around his shoulders, whispering, "You did great." Afterward, people came up to thank them, to shake their hands, to say they were inspired. But what meant the most to him was when a younger student came over and said, "I'm glad you said that. It made me feel like I'm not alone." That night, when they got home, his mother poured them both a cup of tea. She was quiet, thoughtful. "You spoke from your heart today," she said. "That takes courage." He smiled shyly. "You do it all the time," she chuckled. "Maybe. But hearing it from you means more than you think." Over the next few weeks, things began to shift in small but noticeable ways. The local police department started holding open workshops with residents, inviting community members to share their concerns and experiences. His mother was asked to lead one of them, and even though he didn't want to go at first, she convinced him to attend. When he walked into the meeting room, he saw some of the same officers who had been there that day. Not the ones directly involved, but others from the same department. They looked uncomfortable, but they listened. Some of them asked honest questions about how they could do better. For the first time, he saw them as people trying to learn, not just uniforms and badges. One officer came up to him afterward and said quietly, "You probably don't believe me, but I'm sorry for what you went through. I'm going to remember it." It made me think.